37 minutes after I dropped my husband off at the airport, I got a bank alert. The charge was for $18,640. I stared at the number for several seconds. Then I looked at the merchant, Aurora Fertility Center, Miami, Florida, a fertility clinic. I was still sitting in the airport parking garage. Less than half an hour earlier, I had hugged Ryan goodbye at security. He told me he was moving to Singapore for 18 months. His company was supposedly opening a new division in Asia, and he had been chosen to lead the entire project. It was the biggest opportunity of his career. I didn't want him to go, but I still smiled and told him I would be fine. "Go," I said. "I'll take care of everything here." Ryan kissed my forehead. 18 months will go faster than you think, Ava. Now his credit card had just been charged more than $18,000 at a fertility clinic in Miami. The strangest part was that my first thought wasn't that he was cheating. I thought the card had been stolen. Ryan and I had been married for 8 years. When I turned 30, I told him I wanted to start trying for a baby. He said his career was finally gaining momentum and asked me to wait. At 32, I brought it up again. That time he told me there was a history of heart problems on his father's side of the family. He said he was afraid of passing something on to a child. Then he looked at me and said something I never forgot. "Maybe we don't need children to be a family," I cried. I struggled with it, but eventually I accepted it, because I loved him. I told myself that if we had each other, we could still have a good life. And now the man who told me he didn't want children had just spent $18,640 at a fertility clinic in another state. Ryan had several authorized user cards attached to my primary account. My credit was stronger than his, and when we bought our condo, most of the financing had gone through accounts connected to me. I called the bank immediately. The representative confirmed that the fertility clinic charge had been made with a physical card. It wasn't an online transaction. The correct PIN had also been entered. I asked, "Can you see who actually used the card?" She said she couldn't give me any additional merchant details, but she could freeze all authorized user cards immediately. "Do it," she paused. "Just to confirm, that includes all 3 cards issued to your husband, Ryan Holloway." I looked toward the airport exit. "Yes, freeze all of them." After I hung up, I called Ryan. His phone was off. I texted him. No response. Then I remembered the last thing he had said before walking toward security. "Once I'm on the plane, I might be unreachable for 12 or 13 hours. Don't worry if you don't hear from me." At the time, it sounded completely normal. Now it sounded prepared. I didn't drive home. Instead, I opened our airline family account. Ryan always booked flights through our shared rewards program, so his trips usually showed up automatically. There was a ticket to Singapore, but the status said, "Cancelled." The ticket had been canceled 3 days earlier. Then I saw another mileage redemption, Boston to Miami. Departure at 11:40 that morning. Business class, 2 passengers, Ryan Holloway, and Chloe Bennett. I knew Chloe. She was 27 years old. She had worked as a client relations manager at Ryan's former company. I had even sat beside her at the company Christmas party the previous year. She was beautiful, golden brown hair, bright smile. The kind of woman who could make almost anyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. That night at the Christmas party, she had raised her wine glass toward me and said, "Ryan always says he never would have made it this far without you." I actually remember thinking she was sweet. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't Ryan. It was my mother-in-law, Diane. "When are you coming home? Caleb already moved his things in. My knee is killing me, and we haven't had dinner." I closed my eyes. I had almost forgotten. 3 days before his supposed move to Singapore, Ryan had brought his mother and younger brother into our condo. Diane was scheduled for knee surgery the following month. His brother Caleb had recently lost his job and his lease was ending. Ryan told me they would only stay for a few months. "I'm going to be overseas," he said. "I can't leave Mom by herself. And with you working so much, it might be nice to have family around." I had already been uncomfortable with the idea, but Ryan hugged me and said it was the one thing keeping him from feeling good about leaving. So I agreed. Sitting in that airport garage, I finally understood. He wasn't worried about leaving his family behind. He had simply handed them over to me. Then he flew to Miami with another woman. I didn't tell Diane what I had discovered. I just texted, "I'll be home later. There's food in the fridge. You can make something." She replied almost immediately. "Ryan said you would take care of us." I stared at that sentence. For once, I didn't explain myself. I got home a little after 7. Ryan and I lived in a high-rise condo in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. It wasn't huge, but it was expensive, 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful city views. Ryan loved standing in front of those windows and saying, "Give me a few more years. We'll have something twice this size." I used to believe him. When I opened the door, Caleb was stretched across the couch playing video games, 30 years old, unemployed. Takeout boxes were sitting on the floor beside him. Diane was at the dining table looking irritated. "What took you so long? I was working." She acted like she hadn't heard me. "Ryan told you I need help right now. I can't cook every night with my knee." The old version of me would have apologized. That night I put my purse down and said, "Then order something." She stared at me. Caleb turned away from the television. Diane asked, "Are you in a bad mood?" "A little." Then she asked if Ryan had boarded his flight. I looked at her. "I guess so." I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. For the first time, I didn't clean up anyone's dinner mess. At 9 that night, Ryan finally texted me. "Just landed from my connection. Phone died." I stared at the message. If I hadn't seen the flight records, I would have believed him. I replied, "Glad everything's going smoothly." He sent a heart. Then he asked, "Mom and Caleb settled in, okay?" I typed, "They're settled." I didn't mention Chloe, I didn't mention Miami, I didn't mention the fertility clinic, because suddenly I didn't want an explanation. I wanted facts. The next morning I went to work like normal. My name is Ava Mercer. I was 35 years old. I was the director of operations for a medical equipment company. I managed a team of more than 100 people. Supply chain problems, budgets, vendor disputes, staffing issues, emergency projects. At work, I was calm under pressure. But during 8 years of marriage, any time the problem involved Ryan, I became a different person. I always asked myself the same questions. Maybe he's exhausted. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe I should be more understanding. That morning, for the first time, I handled my marriage the way I would handle a corporate crisis. I created a spreadsheet: date, amount, account, transaction I didn't recognize. Within 2 hours, I realized the fertility clinic bill was only the beginning. We had a joint savings account. The money was supposed to go toward a larger home someday, or maybe retirement. 10 months earlier, the balance had been $118,000. Now it was barely over $21,000. Ryan had transferred almost $96,000 out of the account over the previous 10 months. The amounts were different every time: $2,000, $5,000, $12,000, $8,500. Most of the money went to something called Blue Heron Consulting. I had never heard of it. I searched the business registration: Florida owner Chloe Bennett. My hands went cold. Then I checked the credit cards: restaurants, hotels, jewelry stores, private clubs, several airline upgrade charges. More than $35,000 in 4 months. And all that time, Ryan had been telling me we needed to cut back. The previous year, I wanted to replace my 6-year-old laptop. It was going to cost about $2,300. Ryan asked, "Do you really need it right now?" So I didn't buy it. 3 months earlier, some college friends invited me to Napa for 4 days. My entire budget would have been a little over $2,000. Ryan reminded me that mortgage rates were high and said we needed to be more responsible. I canceled the trip. Meanwhile, he had spent more on another woman in 4 months than I had spent on vacations in 3 years. I didn't cry, at least not that morning. At lunch, I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Maya Chen. A coworker had used her during her divorce and recommended her highly. I didn't tell my friends. I just told Maya I needed an appointment as soon as possible. She told me to come at 5. I brought the bank records, credit card statements, transfers, everything. Maya spent about 40 minutes going through the documents. Then she asked, "Was all this money earned during the marriage?" "Yes." She asked about the condo. We had purchased it together after we got married, but $200,000 of the down payment had come from an inheritance my father left me. Maya told me to find proof of that, too. Then she pointed at the Blue Heron transfers. If these payments had no legitimate business purpose and were being used for an affair or to move marital assets, we can request a complete accounting, I asked. Can we freeze everything now? She didn't immediately say yes. She said she needed more evidence, but she told me to reroute my future paychecks into an account in my name only. She also told me to remove Ryan's access to my personal credit lines. Do not move the remaining marital money, she warned. Do not delete anything. And most importantly, don't tell him you're investigating. I nodded. As I was leaving, Maya asked, "Are you ready to divorce him?" I stood by the door for a long time. I don't know. And I meant it. Even after seeing $96,000 disappear, even after discovering he was in Miami with Chloe, there was still a ridiculous little voice inside me asking, what if there's something I don't understand? 8 years of marriage doesn't turn off like a light switch. Finding out someone betrayed you doesn't instantly erase everything you once felt. That night, Ryan video called me. Behind him was a blank white wall. He said he was in an airport lounge and would be flying to Singapore soon. I noticed he was still wearing the same shirt from the day before. His hair looked damp. "You look tired," he said. "Work's busy." He asked whether Diane had taken her medication, whether Caleb had started applying for jobs, whether I had paid the building fees. Everything sounded normal. So normal it almost made me sick. I asked, "How's the weather in Singapore?" He paused. "Hot? You're already there?" "I just got to the hotel." I stared at him. "I thought you said you were in an airport lounge." He froze for a second. Then he smiled. "I'm exhausted." I misspoke. "Yeah, I'm at the hotel." Before all this, I probably wouldn't have noticed. Now I understood how fragile lies really are. Once you stop helping someone maintain them, they start falling apart on their own. After the call, I searched for Chloe on social media. Her main account hadn't been updated, but she had a smaller account. I remembered seeing it once after a company event. It was public. Her newest photo showed a hotel balcony, ocean, palm trees, white bathrobe. Ryan wasn't in the picture. But there were 2 champagne glasses on the table, and beside them was a man's watch. I knew that watch. I had given it to Ryan for his birthday 3 years earlier. It cost me more than $6,000, the caption said, "Finally starting the life I was promised." That was the first night I cried, not loudly. I sat on the bathroom floor and let the tears fall. I wasn't even thinking about Chloe. I was thinking about my 31st birthday. I had once brought Ryan an appointment confirmation from a fertility clinic. I said, "If we really want children someday, maybe we should get checked sooner rather than later." Ryan pushed the paper aside. "Ava, I don't want our marriage to become a baby-making project," he said it gently. I remember feeling guilty, like I had pressured him, so I canceled the appointment. Now he was taking another woman to a fertility clinic in Miami. He hadn't been afraid of turning marriage into a project. He just didn't want that future with me. On the 3rd day, something else happened. Diane was in the kitchen looking for something. She couldn't figure out the coffee machine and kept calling my name. I was getting ready for a meeting, so I didn't go. While digging through one of the cabinets, she knocked over a stack of Ryan's old paperwork. An envelope fell to the floor. I picked it up. Ryan's former company name was printed at the top. The date was 7 weeks earlier. I opened it. It was a separation agreement, not a transfer, not an international assignment. Ryan had left the company 7 weeks ago. The document clearly stated that his employment had ended and that he was still bound by confidentiality and client restrictions. I stood in the kitchen holding the letter. Diane looked at it. Her face changed. I noticed immediately. "You knew?" "Knew what?" "Ryan doesn't work there anymore." She looked away. "He doesn't tell me about his work." I didn't push, but I knew she was lying. That afternoon, I went directly to Ryan's former company. The receptionist knew me. I said Ryan had left the country in a hurry and forgotten some tax information, so I needed to speak with HR. About 10 minutes later, his former department head, Olivia, came out to meet me. I asked, "When exactly does Ryan's Singapore assignment officially begin?" Olivia stared at me. "What Singapore assignment?" I looked at her. She looked at me. And in that moment, both of us realized something was very wrong. Olivia couldn't give me confidential company information, but she confirmed one thing. Ryan had left the company 7 weeks earlier, and it had not been voluntary. The company had discovered that several vendor referral payments had been redirected into a consulting firm connected to him. After an internal investigation, Ryan signed a separation agreement. Olivia said, "I assumed you knew," I asked. "Has he mentioned moving to Singapore to anyone here?" She shook her head. Then she hesitated. "He contacted some former clients last month. He told them he was starting his own consulting firm. Our legal department is looking into it." I left the building feeling weak. Now I understood. Ryan wasn't taking a short trip to Miami. He may never have planned to come home. The 18-month Singapore assignment was an entire fake life he had created for me. He needed me to keep paying the mortgage, keep taking care of his mother, keep taking care of his brother, keep the appearance of our marriage alive, while he used our money to build another life in Florida with Chloe. And even that wasn't the worst part. That evening, Maya sent me a document she had uncovered. Ryan had applied for an $80,000 home equity line of credit against our condo. There was already a spousal acknowledgement attached to the application with my electronic signature. I had never signed it. I stared at the signature. He hadn't tried to imitate my handwriting. He had used an old digital signature file I had stored for previous documents. That was the moment my last hesitation disappeared. Cheating was one thing. Spending our savings was another. But now he was preparing to use my home to fund his new life, too. I called Maya. "I want the divorce. Are you sure?" "Yes." Then, from this point on, everything goes through evidence and documentation. The next morning, I removed Ryan from every personal credit account connected to me. Maya sent a fraud dispute to the lender to stop the home equity application. We also began preparing a request to protect the remaining marital assets. I didn't move the money still sitting in our joint account. I only redirected my future salary and personal investment income into accounts under my name. Ryan noticed quickly. He called me at 3 that afternoon. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't, "Do you know about Chloe?" It wasn't, "Did you find out I lost my job?" He yelled. "Ava, why are my cards frozen?" I was sitting in my office. The bank flagged suspicious charges. "What suspicious charges? Those are my cards. The primary account is mine." Silence. "Turn them back on. I have expenses I need to pay." "What expenses?" He didn't answer. I knew. The fertility clinic. Then he said, "Don't use money to punish me because you're upset." I almost laughed. "I haven't even started talking to you about money yet." He told me we would talk later and hung up. 4 hours later, Chloe texted me for the first time. "I didn't know you two weren't officially separated." I stared at the message. My heart was pounding. I didn't answer. Then another message arrived. "Ryan told me you only still shared an address because of taxes and the condo." I still said nothing. A third message came. "He said you knew about us that time," I replied. "Yesterday morning he hugged me at the airport and told me he would come home after 18 months so we could continue our marriage." There was no response for a long time. 10 minutes later, she blocked me. I didn't know if she believed me. I didn't care. That evening, Diane finally confronted me. She was sitting in the living room. "Did you freeze Ryan's money?" I looked at her. "He told you?" "He called Caleb. He says you've lost your mind?" I asked. "Do you know about Chloe?" She didn't answer right away. That was enough. "When did you find out?" She frowned. "I only knew Ryan had a female friend he was close to." "Do friends go to fertility clinics together?" Her face changed. "What?" I put the bank record on the table. 18,640. She stared at it. And then she said something I still can't forget. "Ryan is almost 40. It's normal for him to want children." Everything inside me went quiet. Not because I was shocked, because suddenly everything made sense. "What about me?" She said, "You've been married all these years and never had children." I cut her off. "Who told you I didn't want children?" Diane said nothing. I laughed once. "Ryan did, didn't he?" For years, Diane had made little comments. "A woman needs children to have a complete family. You shouldn't wait too long. Career isn't everything." Every single time I protected Ryan. I told her we had made the decision together. I never told her that her son was the one who kept saying no. Now I knew he had made me the problem in her eyes too. Finally, Diane said, "What's done is done. If you still love him, don't destroy his future." I looked at her. His future? The one he was buying with my money, my home, and 8 years of my marriage? She had nothing to say. I stood up. "You and Caleb need to move out." Her voice immediately rose. "This is my son's home too?" "Yes. And after the divorce he can deal with his ownership rights through attorneys. But you and Caleb aren't owners. You don't have a lease. I'll give you enough time to find somewhere else." Caleb came out of the bedroom. He said Ryan promised they could stay until he came back. I looked at him. Ryan also promised me he was in Singapore. The room went silent. I gave them 3 weeks, not 3 days. I didn't want anyone later claiming I had thrown an older woman facing surgery onto the street. I even found Diane a short-term recovery apartment near her medical center. She refused it. She said she wasn't going anywhere. By the second week, she started making life inside the condo as difficult as possible. She filled my home office with boxes. Caleb invited friends over. They played the TV late at night. Diane called Ryan's relatives and told them I was throwing a sick woman out because I was jealous of a younger woman. The old Ava would have tried to explain everything. This time I didn't. My attorney sent written notice. Every conversation was documented, and I kept working. During that period, work probably saved me. My company had just landed a major hospital equipment contract. We needed to redesign our entire East Coast warehousing and distribution network. I volunteered to lead it. The consulting partner on the project was Lucas Grant, 39 years old, a partner at an architecture and logistics firm. I had met Lucas once, about 6 years earlier. Back then, I hadn't been promoted to operations director yet. He remembered me after our first meeting. He asked, "Didn't we work together on that Baltimore project years ago?" I smiled. "You actually remember that? Of course. You were the one who saved that project." I froze for a second. Ryan never liked hearing people talk about how good I was at my job. He used to joke, "When Ava gets into work mode, suddenly everybody becomes her employee." I always laughed. Now I understood that it wasn't entirely a joke. He had never been comfortable when I took up too much space. Lucas didn't ask about my marriage. He had no idea what was happening. We just talked about work, and that felt surprisingly good. On the 12th day, Maya called me. The court had approved temporary financial restrictions. Ryan could no longer move certain marital assets without authorization. The home equity loan was officially stopped. I listened, then I said, "Good." That night, Ryan came back from Miami, not Singapore, not 18 months later, 12 days. He came straight to the condo. Diane let him in. I was sitting at the dining table working. Ryan hadn't shaved. He looked exhausted. He walked toward me and immediately said, "What the hell are you doing?" I looked up at him. For 8 years, I had waited for that man countless times, waited for him to come home from work, waited for him to return from business trips, waited for him to decide whether he wanted children, waited for his career to stabilize, waited for him to finally have time for me. This was the first time he stood in front of me, and I didn't want him anywhere near me. I placed the divorce papers on the table. "I'm divorcing you." Diane started crying. Caleb cursed under his breath. Ryan stared at me. "Let's talk in the bedroom." "No. This is between you and me." I looked at his mother. "Apparently it isn't." He went quiet. I asked, "How was Singapore?" His face went pale. I continued, "Or was the weather better in Miami?" Nobody moved. Then I asked, "How's Chloe?" Ryan started explaining. He said things weren't what I thought. He said losing his job 7 weeks earlier had terrified him. My career kept getting better, he said. He felt like a failure standing next to me. Chloe had been there when he felt lost. She understood him. She encouraged him. Their feelings slowly changed. I looked at him. Did the $96,000 slowly change too? He stopped talking. I pushed the transfer records toward him. Then the home equity application. Then the fertility clinic bill. Ryan looked down. After a while he said, "I was going to pay it back." When? As soon as the new company became profitable, everything would have gone back. That was when I realized something. Even now, he thought the problem was simply that he hadn't returned the money yet. I asked, "Why did you go to the fertility clinic with her?" This time, the silence lasted longer. Finally, he said, "Chloe wants children." My chest tightened. So did I. "Ava, it was different." "How?" He became irritated. He said our relationship had felt tense for years, that I turned everything into a plan, a timeline, a budget, a goal. With me, he said, he always felt like he was being evaluated. Chloe made him feel relaxed. Relaxed? Yes. I pointed at the bank records. Of course you felt relaxed. I paid for the apartment. I paid for the flights. I paid for the clinic. I was taking care of your mother and your brother. You didn't have anything left to worry about. His expression changed. He stood up. Then he said the most painful thing he said that entire night. "I just wanted to know what it felt like to be with a woman who didn't make me feel like I was failing every day." The room went completely quiet. I didn't cry. I just nodded. "Now you know. And now you're going to find out what life feels like when I stop paying for it." He immediately said that wasn't what he meant. I wasn't listening anymore. I told him that starting the next morning, all communication would go through attorneys. Diane jumped up. You can't destroy a family because of one mistake. I looked at her. I'm not the one who destroyed this family. Ryan reached toward me, I stepped back. Don't touch me. That night I went to a hotel. Not because the condo wasn't mine, I just couldn't stand being in the same space with them. The next morning Ryan received the asset restriction order. The day after that he received a letter from his old company's attorneys. His new Miami business had been using client lists and pricing information from his former employer. The company believed he had violated his separation agreement. Then the investigation uncovered something even worse. Several vendor payments might also have been connected to Blue Heron Consulting, and Blue Heron belonged to Chloe. Ryan finally started panicking. He called. I ignored it. He emailed. I forwarded everything to Maya. Then he began calling from different numbers. Eventually I answered once, Ava, I might lose everything. I was sitting in the parking garage at work. You already lost me. He said he knew he had made a mistake. He said nothing permanent had happened at the fertility clinic. It had only been consultations and preliminary testing. He said he and Chloe were fighting. I asked, if she were still standing beside you, would you be calling me right now? He said nothing. I hung up. 2 days later, Chloe asked to meet me. I didn't want to. Maya said if Chloe was willing to provide financial records, we could meet at her office. Chloe arrived without makeup. She looked much younger than the woman I remembered from the Christmas party. The first thing she said was, Ryan lied to me. I almost laughed. I didn't. She told me Ryan had claimed we had been separated for 2 years. He said we only shared an address because of the condo and taxes. He said I didn't want children. He said I cared more about my career. He said I had another man. He described himself as someone trapped in a dead marriage, I asked. Then why did you tell me at Christmas that he never would have succeeded without me? She looked down, because by then I was already starting to think some of his story didn't make sense. That didn't make her innocent. She knew I was his wife. At minimum, she knew the marriage wasn't actually over. She chose to believe the version that made things easiest for her. Then she placed some documents on the table. Blue Heron Consulting account records. For the first time, I could see exactly where the $96,000 had gone. $38,000 for the Miami apartment and deposits. $24,000 to register the new business, lease office space, and buy equipment. More than $18,000 for the fertility clinic. The rest went to travel, a vehicle, and living expenses, Chloe said. He told me it came from investments he owned before you were married. Now you know it didn't. She asked if I was going to sue her. I told her that wasn't entirely my decision. The lawyers would follow the evidence. Then she asked, Do you hate me? I thought about it. I don't have time to hate you. She started crying. I didn't comfort her. That was when I first understood something. Once you really start moving forward, the people who used to keep you awake at night can suddenly become much less important. A month later, Diane had her knee surgery. She and Caleb finally moved out. Not because she accepted my decision, because Ryan could no longer afford the lifestyle she expected. She eventually moved into the short-term recovery apartment I had found. On moving day, she stood at the door and said, You're going to regret this. Regret what? Not giving Ryan a child. A sentence like that would have destroyed me before. That day it didn't. I looked at her. What I regret is spending years treating his decisions like they were my failures. Then I closed the door. For the first time in 8 years, I lived alone in that condo. That first night was very quiet. No Ryan. No Diane calling me. No Caleb playing video games. I sat on the living room floor eating takeout straight from the container, and suddenly I laughed. I realized silence wasn't scary. For years I had been terrified of ending my marriage because I thought I would come home to nobody. Now I understood. Some homes are full of people and you still feel completely alone. And sometimes you can be the only person in the room and finally feel safe. The divorce took about 6 months. Ryan lost the Miami company. His former employer eventually settled the civil claims against him. He agreed to repay part of the disputed money through a long-term payment plan. Blue Heron shut down. Chloe moved to Denver. Later she sent me an email. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she had learned an expensive lesson. Never trust a man who has to make his wife sound worthless in order to make himself sound lovable. I didn't reply. I didn't need some emotional ending with her anymore. My life was already moving in another direction. The hospital project went extremely well. My company promoted me to vice president of operations. Lucas and I also started spending more time together. One night after a project dinner, he asked if I wanted to walk to the parking garage together. We talked about work the whole way. When we reached my car, he suddenly said, "I'd like to take you to dinner." I looked at him. "We just had dinner." He smiled. "Not a work dinner." I knew what he meant. I didn't immediately say yes. "I'm still getting divorced." "I know. And I'm not ready for anything complicated." "Then it doesn't have to be complicated. If you don't want to go, just say no. Tomorrow's meeting won't be weird." I stood there for a few seconds. Ryan had always been good at turning his emotions into my responsibility. If he was unhappy, I had to fix it. If his career was struggling, I had to support him. If his mother was angry, I had to solve it. Even his insecurity about my success somehow became my fault. Lucas was showing me something I hadn't experienced in years. A man could like me without making his feelings my responsibility. I said, "Ask me again after the divorce is final." He nodded. Okay, that was it. No pressure, no wounded performance. Our meeting the next morning was completely normal. 8 months later, my divorce became final. The marital property was divided. Ryan was ordered to return part of the money he had transferred. I kept the condo because I could afford the mortgage, and because a significant part of the original down payment had come from my inheritance. I didn't try to leave Ryan with nothing. I didn't want him homeless. I simply stopped giving up my own rights to make his life easier. Outside the courthouse, he waited for me. He looked much thinner than he had 8 months earlier. "Ava, I understand now what I did." I didn't respond. He said losing his job had terrified him. Watching my career keep growing made him feel like he was falling behind. Chloe had made him feel important again. "I'm not saying I didn't love you." I looked at him. "Maybe you did love me once, but eventually you loved what I did for you more." His eyes turned red. "If I had come home and told you I'd been fired, would you have helped me?" I gave a small laugh.
Yes.
He looked surprised. "If you had come home and told me you lost your job, that you were scared and that you didn't know what to do, I would have helped you. I probably would have helped with your resume. I would have made a budget with you. I might even have supported you while you started another company. But you never gave me that choice. You lied to me. And then instead of asking for the support I would have willingly given you, you stole it." Ryan lowered his head. After a long time, he asked, "Is there really no chance for us?" I didn't hesitate. "No," and for the first time saying it didn't hurt. The next day, Lucas kept his promise. He asked again, "Can I take you to dinner now?" I smiled. "Yes." Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant. No ocean view, no expensive wine, no diamonds. Lucas was actually 11 minutes late because of traffic. The second he sat down, he apologized. I told him it was fine. He said, "I'm not apologizing because I'm afraid you're mad. I'm apologizing because if you make someone wait, you should apologize." It was such a small thing, but I remembered it. Healthy relationships aren't always dramatic. They don't make you guess every day. They don't make you check phones. They don't make you prove you deserve to be chosen. Lucas had his career. I had mine. Sometimes we only saw each other twice a week. Once he had to travel to Chicago with a female business partner. Because of my past, I immediately felt anxious. This time, I didn't pretend I was fine. I told him directly. "This makes me a little uncomfortable, but I know part of that is what happened to me before." Lucas didn't say, "Why don't you trust me?" He sent me his schedule and asked, "What would help you feel more comfortable? I don't need constant updates."
Just text me when you get to the hotel. Okay, that was it. No fight. No sarcasm.
For the first time, I understood that trust doesn't mean asking someone who has been hurt to suddenly forget everything that happened. Trust can also mean letting a new relationship slowly prove that it is different. A year later, I sold the condo. Not because I couldn't handle the memories. I just didn't need that much space anymore. I bought a smaller place closer to work. It had a small balcony. The morning sunlight was beautiful. When Lucas helped me move, he noticed an old file box in my office. Inside were papers from the fertility clinic I had contacted when I was 31. He didn't ask about them. I told him. I told him I had once really wanted to become a mother. Then Ryan kept asking me to wait. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe the dream wasn't important anymore. Lucas listened. Then he asked, "What do you want now?" I was quiet for a long time. "I don't know." "Then you can wait until you know." 2 years earlier, I might have thought that answer was too simple. Now I realized it was exactly what I had been missing. Choice. Not a husband deciding whether we would have children. Not a mother-in-law telling me when a woman should become a mother. Not my age creating panic. My choice. Another 6 months passed. Then I told Lucas, I think I want to try. Not because I was afraid of losing him. Not because I wanted to prove our relationship was serious. Because I had finally realized that becoming a mother was still something I wanted for myself. It didn't happen immediately. Our first round of tests wasn't perfect. I cried once. Lucas was disappointed too, but he never turned the result into somebody's fault. We went through treatment for a while. And eventually, I became pregnant. The day I saw the positive test, I didn't tell anyone right away. I sat on the bathroom floor for almost 10 minutes. I thought about that $18,640 bank alert. For a long time, that number had felt like one of the cruelest things that had ever happened to me. It was proof that my husband was willing to build a future with another woman that I had once begged him to consider with me. But 2 years later, I no longer felt like I had lost some competition, because what I had now wasn't something Ryan had refused to give me. It was a life I had chosen for myself. When Lucas came home, I put the test result on the dining table. He stared at it, then he looked at me. His first question was, "Are you happy?" Not, "We're finally having a baby." Not, "This is amazing." He asked, "Are you happy?" I nodded. "I am." Only then did he wrap his arms around me. We didn't get married right away. Our daughter was 8 months old when we finally had the wedding. It was small, only family and our closest friends, no luxury hotel, no massive decorations. We got married in a renovated glass greenhouse outside Boston. That morning I stood in front of the mirror. I wasn't thinking about Ryan, at least not at first. Then Maya arrived. She smiled when she saw me. "Do you remember what you said the first time you came into my office?" "What?" "You said the thing you were most afraid of losing wasn't the money. You said you were afraid of losing yourself again." I went quiet. That woman had been me 2 years earlier, the woman sitting in a lawyer's office who couldn't even say for sure whether she wanted a divorce. For most of my life, I thought the more you sacrificed in a relationship, the more serious your love must be. So I waited. I understood. I took care of his family. I delayed my plans. I covered more expenses. When he was struggling, I pushed my own needs aside. Eventually, I learned that giving isn't the problem. Giving without boundaries is, because when your sacrifice becomes unlimited, the other person can stop seeing it as love. They start seeing it as the default. They stop thinking, "She chooses to do this because she loves me," and start thinking, "This is what she is supposed to do." Ryan didn't truly lose me the day he went to Miami with Chloe. It wasn't the day he forged my signature. It wasn't even the day he took $96,000. It happened earlier. It happened when he became completely sure that no matter what he did, Ava would stay. So now when people ask me, "What's the best revenge after someone betrays you?" I don't say freeze his cards. I don't say make him lose his business. I don't say make him watch you become happy with another man. Those things were never the real victory. What changed my life was when I stopped solving his problems. He lost his job. He could deal with it. His mother needed care. His family could make a plan. He owed money. He could repay it. He told lies. He could explain them. I stopped being the person responsible for cleaning up every disaster he created. And once I stopped, I realized something. A lot of Ryan's confidence had been built on the fact that I was always standing behind him, absorbing the consequences. Before the wedding began, Lucas was waiting for me on the other side of the greenhouse. Sunlight came through the glass ceiling. My sister was holding our daughter. She kept trying to pull off one of her little shoes. I looked at the two of them, and suddenly I thought about that afternoon in the airport parking garage. If I had never gotten that bank alert, maybe Ryan would have continued lying. Maybe I would have kept taking care of his family, kept paying the mortgage, kept protecting the life we had built, and every day I might have waited for a husband in Singapore who didn't exist. So I don't call that day the day I discovered my husband was cheating anymore. I call it the day I finally discovered what my love had been costing me. Of course, love requires effort. Two people building a life together cannot always think only about themselves. Sometimes you compromise, sometimes you care for the other person, sometimes one person carries a little more when the other is struggling, but healthy love has one important difference. Today, I may take one extra step for you. Tomorrow, you will be willing to take one for me. It isn't one person walking forever, while the other person stands still and complains that they aren't moving fast enough. I used to confuse patience with maturity, I confused sacrifice with love, and I confused being needed with being valued. Now I know better. Someone who truly loves you will not give you every responsibility simply because you are capable of handling it. They won't keep testing your boundaries because they know you're kind. They won't use your money, your time, and your loyalty to build their freedom while telling you they're doing it for your future. And they won't ask you to disappear from your own life just to keep the relationship alive. When the wedding music started, I began walking toward Lucas. He wasn't waiting for me on some raised platform. He came down 2 steps. He stopped in front of me and held out his hand. I placed mine in his, and suddenly I understood something. Maybe good love really is that simple. It isn't one person rescuing the other. It isn't one person walking ahead while the other spends their life trying to catch up. It is two people who already know how to stand on their own. They meet somewhere along the way. They realize they want the same kind of future, and then they decide to walk toward it together. It took me 8 years to learn that. The lesson was expensive, but from that point on, I never again believed I had to lose myself to prove how deeply I loved someone. Because now I know this. The kind of love worth keeping will never ask you to disappear first.